Thank you, Saul. I really appreciate it. We're glad to be here.
And we just want to say in advance, not only are we glad to see Saul, we're also glad to see you, Richard, but also everybody else. And we are a little more scripted than probably anyone else will be, because the two of us will kill each other if we aren't.
Yeah, there's a long story about her being on crutches, but I don't want to get into that right
It was him. That's the whole story, is it was him.
Yeah. But if we could bring the lights down as much as possible, is that as low as we can go? And the screen, there we go, that feels better, because it's about these images. And I'm afraid the projector is not the best in the world, but we're going to show you what we've got, and hopefully it'll work. Okay? We're going to give you a taste of the books that we do, the main imagery of the work, but to absorb the material, you'll have to consume the books. Today we'll focus a little bit on the how and the why and a few examples.
So Peter and I spend our lives exploring humanity in all of its messy, complicated, raucous, cacophonous, strange, and wonderfully imperfect glory. We've done lots and lots of worldwide photojournalism projects, but over the last decade or so, we've been exploring food. The topic is instant entree into the inner workings of the family unit. As Saul said, food touches everyone. It's impacted by culture, by geography, by economics, and by personal taste. What we do is we eat together with these families. We share stories about the minutiae of day-to-day life. And in the end, good stories are born. So what we do is we take a single idea, something that interests us, and then we shape it into a question that we ask in homes across the planet. Some question that will hold our interest long enough to do the research, the travel, the interviews, the photography, and the writing. It's basically what we do in homes across the planet, is this single formulation of a single question.
So one of the questions here's a typical question. What do average families own, and would they put it all out in front of their house for the world to see? Who eats insects, and do they taste good?
No, they don't.
Well, that's another thing. Another question. What does a week's worth of food look like for families around the globe, and how much do they spend for it?
And also, will Peter take a nap or help me set up the food for the picture?
If it didn't take her so long to set up the food, a nap wouldn't really be necessary. But here's another question. What constitutes a day's worth of food for one person, and how many calories does that total?
It took months and months of work to get the calorie totals, and you're going to see a little bit of that work today.
But here's a cautionary image. This is what it looks like when you work with your spouse 24/7.
I thought he wasn't going to use that picture.
Yeah. We're most comfortable outside of our comfort zone. The best stories come under extreme conditions, hot or cold. Greenland is one, Faith's least favorite location because of the temperature.
True, I never stopped complaining.
But Emil's story is great, one of the last full-time hunters on the eastern coast, although much of his family's food is now from the global marketplace, like breakfast here at home after a hunting payday.
So we discovered the original seed of the idea for our work about food in a remote place in the 90s, the western side of Papua New Guinea. At the time it was called Irian Jaya, now it's called Papua. We spend about half of the year working in other parts of the world, so we were working in the Asmat at the time. It's the world's biggest, hottest swamp. I cannot believe my husband made me go there. We were deep in the jungle watching a family process starch from the sago palm tree here to make sago flour, the staple food of these hunter-gatherers. Each time these families cut a tree down, about one a week, they would leave part of it to rot, and when they returned, they would harvest the fat, juicy grubs, and then, of course, they would roast them and eat them. But one day we came upon a man and his son carrying a package of instant noodles. Logging money had begun to trickle into this remote area, and with it, the first merchant selling dried food and snacks. We watched as the older boy ate the dry noodles and the other ate the flavor packet. And now these are people with serious nutritional deficiencies and debilitations, and you don't have to be a food activist to wonder if it's a good idea for people already struggling to get basic nourishment to dose themselves with jolts of sugar, salt, and all sorts of other things. We began to wonder what in the world everyone else on the planet was eating.
Now, it doesn't actually take a third world expedition to realize that our world is shrinking, but the inhabitants are not. Traveling back and forth From the United States, as often as we do, we recognized early on, before many did in the United States, that Americans were fighting a battle, one of expanding waistlines, and we saw it happening before our eyes each time we shopped and looked at what our neighbors had in their shopping carts. At the turn of the millennium, the World Watch Institute reported that for the first time in recorded history, there were just as many overfed as underfed people on the planet. Given fluctuations in world food prices and availability, these numbers might rise and fall, but the underlying fact is that some of us, mostly in the so-called developed world, are eating ourselves to death. In Hungry Planet, we watched typical families the world over as they farmed, shopped, cooked, and ate. During each visit, we created a food portrait of each family surrounded by a week's worth of their groceries. We totaled the cost and included a grocery list. It was much easier to get a family to put out a week's worth of food for Hungry Planet than it was to get them to pull all of their possessions outside of their house for material world.
And so this is What I Eat, the new book that has just come out in August. A snapshot in time of a single day's worth of food for each of our 80 subjects, and a calorie count that orders them in the book from least to most, although we're showing them here in alpha order. We used a typical recent day as a starting point for our interviews, which led to the final food portrait, the food list, and the calorie count. We specifically chose not to cover daily caloric averages, as we wanted to include some extreme examples of eating, like one subject's diet on a binging day, a whopping 12,000 calories, or the 800 calories of our Maasai herder in Kenya. That's what she ate during drought. An average would have muddied those up and been less instructive. If our herder had eaten goat the week we'd covered her, or had not been in drought, the calorie count would have been higher. And what I do is I use the stories to provide the context then of each person's diet, culture, and circumstance. It took months of going back and forth with the subjects and translators as we dissected regional recipes and culinary culture. It would be easier for us to go around the world and just make evocative pictures and have a good time, but doing more, we think, is what sets our work apart. Bookstores have a hard time shelving us. They tell us this all the time. Is it photography? Is it cultural anthropology? Cookbook, investigation, travelogue? We think it's all these things.
So one of the questions we get asked most often is, how do we go about finding a person? Here's a simplified explanation. So we're going to look at Salah Fadlallah at the Berkash camel market outside of Cairo. At the time we covered him, he was 40 years old, and his typical workday diet totaled about 3,200 calories. So how did we find him and the other 80 people in Hungry Planet? Oh, and What I Eat? Here are the steps. Here are the steps, okay. We're going to pick a country. We choose an occupation. In Egypt, we went looking for a camel broker. Then we chase down the subject. We interview the person. We choose a location to make the photo. We set up the food, and then we shoot the picture. We record the subject's age, height, and weight. Then record the weights of every bit of food with a digital scale. We organize the information, then calculate the caloric value of every bit of the food. We have nutritionists at UC Davis in California crunch and verify the numbers. We work hard to load our books with statistics and stories and create a design that puts a face on the numbers. In large countries, we covered several people to provide breadth and diversity. In India, we covered 4.
So this is Muna Kailash. He's age 45, bicycle rickshaw driver, 2,400 calories. Muna and his wife Mira live in a city that is holy to Hindus, Varanasi, where India comes to burn its dead on the banks of the Ganges. It's congested, lively, full of life and death, public courtyards for cooking and eating. Everyone's living very public lives in general, as is common throughout much of the developing world, with extended family around them. And that is where we find Mira, who cooks early and late for her own family, as well as for a couple of doctors nearby. When it's blazing hot, Muna would rather lounge in the courtyard and avoid work. It's a constant, albeit affectionate, battle between the two of them that the two of us recognize. But with real consequences, if he's not out working, there's no money coming in.
And then it's a day-to-day existence for these people.
This is Namibia, Viandera Musatua, age 23, a pastoralist, 1,500 calories for her day's worth of food. We wanted to include some people who were still living a largely traditional life. So one is Himba in Namibia near the Angola border, a civilization on the cusp of change as more and more people don Western clothes and modern jobs. Viandera, a young Himba mom, lives this pastoral life really still completely steeped in the ways of her ancestors, covers herself with ochre and butterfat to beautify and guard against the sun. Her diet is fermented milk, seasonal berries, and an occasional goat, and nowadays cornmeal porridge. Sometimes, though, when we work, culture and genders clash. It happened here. At nightfall, Viandera's father, Munengandu, wants to see how I put up our tent. It's on the roof of the truck, I tell him, pointing, but I'm not setting it up, he is, and I point at Peter. I'm also not doing the cooking, I tell him provocatively, and wait for an answer. I point at our guide, Timo, who is doing the cooking. Munengandu says, if you're a man here and you're married and anyone saw you putting a pot on the fire, they'd say you're not a man because the day you marry a woman, you've paid a lot of cattle and you're still cooking. No one's paying any cattle in our culture, I tell him. We're equal partners. And Peter looks at me a little askance at that. No cattle at all, he says, not even 10 cattle and a horse like this one. Then the man is not a man. The sharp delineation of gender roles obviously has its place in traditional society, and maybe some others. Brazil, João Cardoso, age 69, fisherman, 5,200 calories. The river system is the highway through much of Brazil's enormous state of Amazonas. We bring our own hammock and swing in steerage with hundreds of others who have done the same, men and women carrying provisions home to their villages. We make the several-hour journey from Manaus and Manacapuro, not knowing if our translator's fisherman friend will be home or not, but he is. So we get there and we hang our hammocks in João's small floating house, which until recently was little more than a leaky shack. He built it with pension money that has begun to flow from the government to poor rural Brazilians. Then there is fishing in the early morning. Peter takes a break from the heat at the right time of day to avoid the piranhas, and we help screen in the house early and late against the malarial mosquitoes that have afflicted João's family. His old house had no screens. Fish is still the staple food for him, along with manioc flour, but now there's also packaged crackers, a Kool-Aid type drink called Windy, and his favorite, pasta. And then we're 2 hours upriver from João. Do we cover the jaguar-killing rancher or his wife? We opt for his wife, Solange, who is raising her son's children, cooking for them and cleaning and seeing them off in their canoe for the ride around the bend to the village school. Solange da Silva Correa, age 49, rancher's wife and mother, 3,400 calories. Her husband provides the comic relief during the interview, and this happens a lot when we work. Solange eats many more tucumar fruits and cornmeal cake than she first reported. He tells us this. She also drinks a lot more guarana than she had first posited, but in the end, we get a good food list. The turtle tied to the kitchen table will become soup for a grandson's birthday. Sometimes the list of food seems more like a negotiation, but in the end, we generally arrive at truth.
Here we are in Bangladesh. This is Alamin Hassan, age 12, a runaway train porter. He's consuming 1,400 calories. In the most densely populated country on the planet, with devastating poverty and a threatening sea level, we meet Alamin in Dhaka's railway station when he offers to carry my camera bag for a few cents. The boy had run away from his mother's home to escape family problems, including chronic hunger. We had planned to cover a pavement dweller, one of the thousands of impoverished Bangladeshis living on the streets, but as often happens, a compelling story caught up with us, and that was Alamin's. We take him to breakfast, we show him our project, we learn his story, we give him our phone to call his mom, who has no idea where he is. Our translator talks to her as well to corroborate the boy's story. As a runaway, Alamin is eating better than he did at home. 2 plates of vegetable curry a day, sweet tea and rice, but it's a dicey proposition for a 12-year-old boy. There's theft of his money while he sleeps, and battles with older boys and men struggling to earn the same meager living. Tokyo, Japan. This is Yajima June, age 26, a bike messenger, 4,800 calories. And we're going to talk about a mistake here. We meet June at his dispatch center, interview him over a few days, and scout Tokyo for the food portrait from the back of a motorcycle. We are trying to avoid red tape wherever possible, and in Japan it can stretch for miles. We ask for forgiveness rather than permission, so we don't get any permits. We practice setting up June's day's worth of food in our hotel room for a quick setup and takedown before we shoot his portrait at a bustling intersection at rush hour, within view of a police substation. We get our time down to 5 minutes, and we took the photo undetected. But we got to do it again the next day after the camera chip failed, and we were on our way to the airport.
And then we were on our way back.
Yes, so now we're in Yemen. Ahmed Swade, age 50. He's a khat seller, 3,300 calories, living in Sana'a, one of the world's most beautiful, albeit dangerous cities. Ahmed's product, khat, is a leafy Arabian shrub, chewed as a stimulant by most men and some women in the Desert Kingdom. And it's a very, very big business. Ahmed agrees to participate in the book, but we can't get to go to his home because the culture is incredibly conservative, and men and women who aren't related rarely sit together, much less converse and have meals. After our interview, we settle for hauling his food up to a nearby rooftop for the picture. Most days, his wife makes him salta, which is a fiery beef stew with fava beans and flatbreads. There's fresh fruits, a lot of khat, and he actually confessed that he professed that he didn't chew into his profits. Sana'a is one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited cities, but there's a good chance that this won't continue because this city and Yemen itself is running out of water. Much of the water that Yemenis do have is used on the khat. They import most of their actual food. In Hadramaut, in the center of the country, it's too dry for khat, so it's flown in by plane for those who can afford it, like for the police we had to pay to guard us when we were in the area. As in Sana'a, the covered women are covered head to toe in black, but with the added touch of straw hat, that's supposed to help beat the heat. Also in Yemen?
This is Sada Haidar, age 27, 2,700 calories. We bridge a deep cultural divide when we interview her, a veiled woman in Sana'a. As Peter said before, men and women who aren't related don't mix in Yemeni culture, and women don't generally pose willingly for public photographs. So if you read the rest of if you read the book, you'll get the rest of her story because we're running out of time here.
Our internal struggle is to balance our desire to tell people what we think and to present our material as non-polemically as possible.
So basically, it's so we just don't rattle around in our own little echo chamber, as we heard so eloquently earlier. Excruciatingly painful at times, though, especially for Peter, who really loves to tell people what he thinks.
Yeah, I just like to help people make intelligent decisions for themselves and for the planet. A lot of people are looking for a conclusion when they read any book in these days of instant analysis, hot-button issues, and 24-hour celebrity news. We conclude that you should read the coverage, look at the photos, and think for yourself.
Thank you very much.